The visitor who didn't exist, but neither of them knew their hardest chapter of their story had only just begun. Victor Kane was already running. The service elevator doors slid open just as he reached them. Empty. He pressed the button for the executive floor. The ride lasted less than 30 seconds. It felt much longer. When the doors opened, the corridor was silent. No hurried footsteps. No unfamiliar faces. Only employees moving between offices as though nothing unusual had happened. Victor slowed his pace. Whoever the visitor was, he knew exactly how to disappear. Downstairs, the security office was already reviewing the building's surveillance footage. Victor placed his company credentials on the desk. I need every camera covering the service entrance, parking garage, and executive corridor. The security supervisor nodded. Within minutes, dozens of video feeds appeared across the monitors. There he was, the same man Victor had photographed in the parking garage. Dark overcoat, calm expression. Visitors pass hanging neatly from his jacket. He entered the service elevator. 42 seconds later, he stepped onto the executive floor. Victor watched closely. The stranger walked with purpose, not like a visitor, like someone who already knew the building. He turned left, past the finance department, walked toward the records archive. Then the screen flickered, only for a second. When the picture returned, the corridor was empty. Victor frowned. Run that again. The technician replayed the footage. The same thing happened. A brief interruption. Less than 2 seconds. Enough time for the stranger to vanish. That's impossible, the technician whispered. Victor wasn't convinced. Nothing about this felt impossible. It felt planned. At the same moment, Julian received an unexpected call from the head of information security. Sir, our archive system recorded an unauthorized file access. Julian looked up from his desk. I thought those files were offline. So did we. What file? There was a pause. The merger investigation. Julian stood immediately. I'm on my way. 5 minutes later, Julian, Victor, and Solene stood inside the secure records room. Rows of locked cabinets stretched from floor to ceiling. A technician projected the digital access log onto a large screen. Only one folder had been opened. Not copied. Not downloaded. Simply opened. Victor studied the timestamp. The visitor came here for one reason. Julian turned to Solene. Does any of this mean anything to you? She stepped closer to the monitor. At first, her expression remained calm. Then the color slowly drained from her face. She wasn't looking at the file. 5 minutes later, Julian, Victor, and Solene stood inside the secure records room. Rows of locked cabinets stretched from floor to ceiling. A technician projected the digital access log onto a large screen. Only one folder had been opened. Not copied. Not downloaded. Simply opened. Victor studied the timestamp. The visitor came here for one reason. Julian turned to Solene. Does any of this mean anything to you? She stepped closer to the monitor. At first, her expression remained calm. Then the color slowly drained from her face. She wasn't looking at the file. She was looking at its reference number. Case file FD417-09. Her breathing stopped. No, Julian noticed immediately. You know it. She nodded slowly, barely above a whisper. I've never forgotten it. Victor looked between them. What is it? Solene swallowed. That isn't the merger investigation. Julian frowned. Then what is it? She closed her eyes. It was the original investigation. The first case. The one that uncovered the financial network. She looked back at the screen. They changed the title, but they forgot to change the case number. Victor opened the photograph he had taken in the parking garage. He enlarged it, then enlarged it again. The image became grainy, almost unusable. Then something caught his attention. A reflection, barely visible in the polished elevator door. Another person, standing several meters behind the visitor. Watching, waiting. Victor leaned closer. The face couldn't be identified, but one detail remained perfectly clear. An employee access card. Sterling Group. Victor slowly looked up. We don't have one, intruder. Julian met his eyes. What do you mean? Victor placed the image on the table. The visitor didn't walk into this building alone. He was being helped. Neither Julian nor Solene spoke, because they had both reached the same terrifying conclusion. The greatest threat to Sterling Group was not outside the company. It had been inside all along. But neither of them knew their hardest chapter of their story had only just begun. But neither of them knew their hardest chapter of their story had only just begun. Sleep never came easily that night. Julian remained in his office long after the last employee had gone home. The photograph Victor had taken lay on his desk. He had studied it so many times that every shadow had become familiar. The fake visitor, the blurred reflection, the Sterling Group access card. Someone inside his company had opened the door. The question was no longer whether Sterling Group had been infiltrated. The question was for how long. At 7 the following morning, Julian called a private meeting. Only 3 people were invited. Victor Kane, Solene Durant, and himself. No assistants, no executives, no minutes, no electronic devices. Victor was the first to speak. We're treating this like an outside attack. Julian nodded. Isn't it? Victor slowly shook his head. No, this is worse. He placed a folder on the table. I've spent 25 years investigating corporate fraud. In almost every case, the biggest damage wasn't caused by outsiders. It was caused by someone the company already trusted. Silence settled over the room. Julian looked at Solene. She understood exactly what Victor meant. Because 6 years earlier, we need to assume every email is monitored. Victor continued. Every phone call could be overheard. Every meeting could be reported. Julian folded his arms. So what do you suggest? Victor smiled. For the first time, we lie. Julian looked puzzled. Victor leaned forward. We feed different pieces of information to different executives. Only one version will reach the people behind this. When it does, we'll know exactly who leaked it. Julian exchanged a glance with Solene. She smiled faintly. It worked in forensic investigations. It still will. By midday, Julian began the test. To his chief financial officer, he mentioned that an external cybersecurity team would arrive on Thursday. To the head of legal, he claimed the archived files had already been copied by investigators. To human resources, he casually mentioned that Victor's assignment had ended. Each conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Each version was different. Each person believed they alone had received confidential information. Then they waited. Late that afternoon, Solene returned to the lobby. For the first time in days, she noticed something ordinary.